designed. It had serious conceptual flaws. It's a deprivation index based on aggregation of 13 indicators which were scored. And if you just look at the design aspects, purely by design, nearly half of the consumption poor would be missed. And there's a lot of concerns about the arbitrariness and the choice of indicators and scores, etc. And in what is very typical style of decision making in India, the design was done on the basis of an expert group was constituted. They did a report, and then eventually the ministry accepted it, and that became the way it was done. So nothing as detailed and carefully done as the Mexican experience. But also the 2002 BPL census, one of the lessons was that it was implemented in an extremely haphazard manner. I mean, there's a lot of reports of corruption and the significant errors of inclusion and exclusion. But it's not just, I don't want to put it all down to corruption. The scale of the challenge is massive. I mean, you're looking at the administrative challenge is huge. It requires a census of 750 million people, which is, it's a big job. Yeah. So, there's also concerns that it lacks transparency and things. But what's happening now is that the next census is due in 2011, and this time it's better thought through, we'll see whether it's better thought through. But at least there's a process in place to try and get around some of the issues that came up with the 2002 one. We don't have the benefit of something like the Mexican Constitution that will that guides the government in terms of exactly what indicators should be chosen, what their weight should be, etc. But the government is in process of consultations with experts, and the center does this, but given the federal structure, consultations with all 28 state governments is an extremely important part of the process. And some principles have been agreed to. So the main concern first is it's squarely with exclusion errors. So that's a decision that has been made. We care much more about whether or not we want all the poor to be included, even at the cost of inclusion of some of the non-poor. I mean, all of these things have implications for the way the indicators will be chosen. The second is aim for transparency and participatory verification. So indicators have to be simple, transparent, verifiable. Even if if there is any technical analysis that shows that some other indicators are better correlated with consumption, poverty, etc., it has to be simple, transparent, verifiable by not necessarily by a government authority that goes to verify it, verifiable by local local government, but they're actually sort of like village councils, the Gram Sabhas, and also verifiable by a large percentage of the population that is illiterate. So the idea is to end up with some method, some indicators and method by which every person can say, I'm on the list because of this, I'm not on the list because of this. I mean, so these are that's a second principle. Third related is focus on implementation. Indicators should be easy to collect. The government is at the moment, they've just mounted the decennial census. They will finish in March. In April, they have to mount this one. And teachers who do these censuses need to go back to teaching. So it can't be, it has to be easy to collect. So where are they headed? I mean, some of the decisions, some of the normative judgments are, I think, reasonably clear now. The first is, it reminds me of the social rights sort of, it has shades of that you presented from Mexico. One, which is that there will be some priority groups the government declares, right? So you call it the union approach or the social rights approach. It says if you meet these two or three, any one of these two or three criteria, you're in. And those are what are being called in India the inclusion criteria. So in the Foster-Alkire methodology, that would be the union approach. But there's the problem that we're faced with is that there is a fiscal constraint, right? So the inclusion criteria cannot be that generally specified, because there's only a certain amount of resources the government is willing to spend. And what it's willing to spend is determined by the poverty number of poor, which is determined on the basis of a consumption poverty line. Right? So it's trying to dovetail the identification of the poor from what comes based on a multidimensional index with numbers that come in from the consumption poverty approach. So there are some priority groups that, and then the second decision that has been made is, well, there are some people at the top that we can exclude. You know, there are some. It'll be pretty easy to get consensus on, say, the top 10-15% of the population. Let's get rid of them. And there'll be a few criteria. Again, if you meet any of these few criteria, you're out. You're still left with a large population in between, maybe about 30 to 40%, and that is where I think the approach that you've put out, that you've developed, not so much, I mean, this index, but the methodology can be useful guidance, because the way that it's going to require some grading or ranking of people who have not been excluded or who are not compulsorily included. The way the grading was done in the previous index suffered from a lot of problems. It didn't meet any of the nice axioms that your index has. So it didn't meet your, I think, I don't know the names of the axioms really, but the deprivation focus axiom, you know, so that as somebody gets better in a dimension in which they're not already deprived, the previous methodology, the previous BPL methodology would have declared them to be better off, even though the indicators in the dimensions in which they are deprived have not improved. The earlier method relied really on ordinal measures, but cardinalized them. So it was really, so there were a number of methodological issues. And I think that's where this approach will come in and can be quite useful. In terms of the process, just very briefly, what the government is doing is, in addition to these consultations, there is a pilot that is being carried out, and in true Indian sort of scale of things, the pilot is on 100,000 households. Yeah. And so for that, I mean, that's why I was also curious if you had suggestions on systematically, if you were to do a pilot and you had the option of designing one, what would you do? And if there is time, I can tell, or interest, I can tell you more about what that pilot is going to do. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much, Rinku. That was very clear and useful, despite you being jet-lagged. We go now to Ruslan, please.
Thank you. Ruslan Yemtsov from the HD Anchor. I don't have as much rich country details to share with you, so I'll be brief. And we'll reflect on a few things that appear from these presentations, this excellent set of presentations and discussions. One is what are the good, very appealing sides of the proposed measure? What are the problematic things that seem to resonate, that seem to sort of be shared around the table, and where we see it sort of moving, how I see it, its motivation for our further work, both in terms of poverty and in terms of targeting. A definitely good thing is that this index, to be credible, to be replicable, has to rely on open data. So even though the authors do not advocate for opening data sets, it really requires, and it really puts a strong emphasis of data being accessible to anybody who wants to emphasize it and to repeat it. But on the other hand, this is also a problem. very often countries do not share data, and in some regions there are no countries which are sharing the data openly. Therefore, what you relied on, no surprise, in Arab world there are only 60% of the countries that all the population covered. And those are the surveys that are not done by the official statistical agencies. These are DHS surveys or mixed surveys that rely on some NGOs. And some countries have problems with them. Some statistical systems have problem with them. And therefore, it might be difficult to sort of present it as an official estimate. What we do, in the poverty practices, the bank gradually developed the way to address this problem, and we have POFCAL, or we have some other tools that are actually very helpful to come up, to overcome the problem of data access. Very often when you have to do large cross-national comparisons, these are the only shortcuts that we have to use. But definitely good thing and a takeaway that it's great that we have another advocacy for working with the users and for opening up data sources. It's also a very credible, very neat way to integrate different dimensions. And it's also putting a lot of rigor in the way how this is done. Very appealing. But by doing this and the implementation that we just witnessed in producing MPI for 104 countries, we tend to a little bit overlook the problems of quality of data themselves. And it has serious implications. The way how the trend is set, we can call it tsunami, or we can call it really a launching of the whole, we suppose, array stream of following work. The selection of specific indicators for different dimensions will create certain path dependency. And I'm really worried about quality in certain dimensions of these indices. DHS data are well known to have serious problem with anthropometrics measurement for children and for adults alike. Just in case of anecdotes, and I'm sure other people have many of them, in Egypt, suddenly in 2003, there was a big improvement in the child in nutritional indicators, the way how it's measured, because it was unusually harsh winter, and women were unwilling to unwrap the babies when they were weighting them. So they've got a bit heavier. And there are many stories like this, right? So it's, and Keenan in her questions actually said it's very clearly is that what we do with this index, the risk is that once we present it, the emphasis will shift towards collecting as many indicators within one survey as opposed to improving quality of measurement in each one. Thirdly, a really good thing about this index is that it's really conceptually very clear discussion of the multidimensionality of well-being. The problem of the particular implementation that we hear and that we see is that it works at the household level. A lot of data are at the household level. And it's very hard to move there to the individual level, which I think is the appropriate unit or the appropriate level at which it has to be conceptualized. Now, what I think is important for poverty economists to take from it. First, there is no coming back. Multidimensional poverty measurement is clearly with us. We have to take it very seriously, and we have to try to come up with a credible way how we overcome what is perceived as a problem, where you have a lot of social progress in many dimensions, and then our poverty measure seems to be stuck. The way how we can address it, and the way, unfortunately,